Good morning, and thank you for joining us. My name is Gary Grotto, and I'm the executive editor of the Arizona Capital Times, and I'll be moderating this morning's scoop. Today, our panel will be talking about the future of childcare. Arizona's childcare system has reached a breaking point after what some will say is 30 years of neglect and the insurmountable weight of the COVID pandemic on top of that. We're going to be discussing how we got here, look at it from multiple dimensions, including affordability, availability, labor shortages, and what we can do to improve the outlook for Arizona families and the economy. First, I'd like to thank our sponsor of today's morning scoop, the Center for the Future of Arizona, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that works to bring Arizonans together to create a brighter and stronger future for our state by advancing the priorities of what Arizonans say matter most to them. One of these priorities is childcare. The Center for the Future of Arizona hopes this morning's conversation will prompt the state's leaders, policymakers, and cross-sector experts to inform policy, practice, and investments to drive the changes Arizonans want to see. Again, thank you to the Center for the Future of Arizona for sponsoring today's morning scoop. And at this time, let me introduce Dr. Sybil Francis, one of the founding members, president, and CEO for the Center for the Future of Arizona. Dr. Francis brings a passion for creating positive change, and a love for our state and her considerable prior national public policy experience to the leadership of CFA. Prior to being named president and CEO in 2018, she served as executive director from 2002 to 2018, during which time she spearheaded key initiatives in education, workforce, and civic engagement, and grew the organization's impact on programs. Dr. Francis, welcome, and please share with us more on what the Center for the Future of Arizona does and why you've chosen to sponsor today's morning scoop.
Thank you so much, Gary, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this really important conversation. And thank you to the panelists for lending their expertise and insights into this really important topic. As you mentioned, Gary, our mission is to bring Arizonans together to create a stronger and brighter future for our state. So we're thrilled to sponsor these morning scoops because it's an important way to bring important issues to Arizonans for their consideration, bringing important conversations, and frankly, driving action, which is what we ultimately hope will happen. We believe it's very important to listen to Arizonans to find out what matters most to them, which was really the reasoning behind our most recent Arizona Gallup survey, which was one of the largest surveys ever conducted in our state across all the issues that matter most to Arizonans. We heard from Arizonans across the state of all ages, ethnicities, income levels, political affiliation, religion, and education levels, making this really one of the most comprehensive scientifically based surveys. One of the things that was really gratifying and exciting, especially in this day and age of polarized political discussions and talk of division among ourselves, is really that Arizonans actually agree on much more than agree on the big important issues, including education and 7 shared public values that we identified in this survey. You can see those on our website at arizonafuture.org. So we identified 7 shared public values as well as 42 actions to support driving our state forward and driving those shared public values and the Arizona we want forward. So we also asked Arizonans not only on the big issues that are important to our future, but also how they were experiencing life. So in some ways, what is the gap between the future we want and the present that we have? And one of the things we asked about, among many others, was the cost and availability of childcare impeding their ability to go back to school for furthering their education or to go back to work. 25% of Arizonans with children 18 or under answered yes to that question. Certainly low-income Arizonans answered that question, but interestingly, even higher income level Arizonans were saying that the cost and availability of childcare were challenges. These are people who could be advancing their lives and contributing to our economy, were it not for these barriers. So I very much look forward to hearing the panelists' discussion on these issues. And I know, Gary, you're going to be sharing a bit of our Gallup data, so I hope the audience finds that of interest. So thank you all again, and I'll be signing off and listening to this conversation. Thanks. Thanks again.
Thank you, Dr. Francis.
Gary. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Francis. Joining us is Barbie Prinster. the Executive Director for the Arizona Early Childhood Education Association, which represents private licensed childcare centers statewide and promotes affordable, quality early care and education that meets the needs of Arizona's families and children. Barbie has been with the association for 13 years and in early childhood education for 30 years. Good morning, Barbie.
Good morning.
Also joining us is Liz Barker Alvarez, the Chief Policy Advisor for First Things First. In this role, she's responsible for strategic planning and oversight of FTF's efforts to build awareness of the importance of early childhood among Arizona's elected leaders and to work with policymakers at all levels to promote public policy that improves outcomes for young children. Liz brings 25 years of communications experience in the education, nonprofit, and government sectors. Good morning, Liz.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
We also have Representative Lorenzo Sierra, who's served Legislative District 19 since 2019, and he also serves on a host of civic organizations and boards. Representative Sierra has been one of the Arizona legislature's leading advocates for early childhood education. He sponsored bills in the past 2 legislative sessions to restore cuts in federal funding. And also joining us is Angela Creedon, Intel's Public Affairs Manager for Arizona. Angela was previously the Vice President for Innovation, Zone Development, and Corporate Engagement at Arizona State University. I'd also like to invite our audience to submit their questions through the chat. And so I'd like to start off with a slide that we could get that up. There we go. 1 second here. So I'd like to start off with Barbie to just give us a snapshot of our childcare system and all the components in it, and then take a look at this graph. And it's the Center for the Future of Arizona had Gallup survey people and the percent of parents with children under 18 who agree with each statement by income level, and just comment on that first graph about the limited availability of childcare. Of course, they believe that the limited availability is keeping them from going back to work or school. Could you go ahead and start?
Sure. Good morning. Again, thank you for all for being here, and thank you for having me on this panel today. I'm honored to be here. Childcare components in Arizona, I think when people sometimes think about childcare, they have their own way of thinking of what that might look like when there are many different types of childcare. Family, friend, and neighbor, which really exploded during the pandemic, where especially if schools were closed, people were working from home. People commonly referred to as pods, learning pods developed. There's Head Start programs. There are childcare providers, like licensed childcare providers that I represent. Those could be, I represent licensed private childcare providers, but there are also licensed homes as well. There's public schools, there's Head Start. So there's many different types of childcare providers in our state. Typically, we think that most children are in a family, friend, and neighbor atmosphere but those are not really trackable, because this might be your neighbor that's watching 2 or 3 kids, maybe Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and then their neighbor watches the kids on Tuesday and Thursday. And I think a lot of people choose those types of environments because, number one, it's available. It's really easy to send your kids down the street. And also it's usually more affordable. So those are the types of providers that we see that are where most kids are in the state. The problem is, again, like I said, is that those are very hard to track, and who is really actually doing that work. If you want to put that slide back up again, I don't know if you have that available, and we could talk about that 22% number that you were talking about.
Yeah. And I just want to say that it's the 2020 Gallup Arizona survey,
Okay.
Arizona We Want, which was done for the Center for Arizona,
Right.
Future of Arizona, and the 22% of parents surveyed with children under 18 agree that limited childcare availability is preventing them from returning to
Mhm.
school or work. So, can you provide some context or meaning to that number, and should we be
Sure,
concerned?
sure. Well, I think access and affordability are the two key A words that we always talk about in childcare. Access meaning, where am I living? Where am I looking for childcare? Am I looking for childcare near my home? Am I looking for childcare near my place of employment? And affordability. We all know that childcare is really expensive, sometimes more than our mortgage or our rent, and especially if you have multiple children. We're looking at, anywhere between 12 to 12,000, sometimes excuse me, even in upwards of $15,000 for infant care. So those are really hard decisions for parents to make, especially, again, these layers were really peeled back during the pandemic of where people were choosing to put their children. So I think people have to make really tough decisions in where they're choosing to put their child, and maybe looking into those family, friend, and neighbor opportunities. But we want people to be able to, if they want to go back to school, to have those, options for childcare. We want them to be able to afford it. We want them to be able to make that decision on, choosing a high quality center, and being able to have a slot available for their children. Sometimes, especially in rural parts of Arizona, and even some parts in our larger cities, infants and toddler care is very few and far between. And because it costs more money to operate those types of programs. So,
Thank you. According to a report by the Center for Investigative Reporting, the number of child care providers has plummeted since 2018, by roughly 1,100. Why is that?
well, childcare operators operate on very razor thin margins. Labor is our most expensive piece to our puzzle, along with rent and what our overhead costs are. But labor is the biggest cost, and the only way to pay teachers and our staff more is to pass that money on to parents. And so it's a teeter-totter, kind of trying to balance this act of, we want to pay staff more because we want to retain them. We want them to stay. It's better for children. We need people to do this hard, complex work. But at the same time, passing along, a tuition increase to families that are already paying an exorbitant amount of money and a big chunk of their income for childcare is a tough ride. So I think that, those are the things that we really need to work on. I know the Build Back Better plan has some really great opportunities for families that are coming out, and hopefully that will, our state will be able to participate in those things.
Now, one of the terms we're probably going to hear today, I read it several times throughout my research for this, was childcare deserts. Can you give us a snapshot of the, Liz, if you'd like to, give us a snapshot of the childcare desert situation in Arizona?
Sure. Gary, even before the pandemic, about 48% of Arizonans lived in a childcare desert. And what that means is that you either live in a census tract where there is no childcare, or there are as many as 3 children for every available childcare slot. So, to Barbie's point, it's not just about where you live. Sometimes for families, the better childcare option is near where they work. So we need an abundance of opportunities that really truly gives families options when it comes to choosing childcare that really meets their needs and their child's needs. And even before the pandemic, that certainly wasn't something that the majority of Arizona families had, was options.
Are these deserts, mostly in the, metropolitan areas, or, do rural areas suffer more from them?
Certainly in rural areas, it's more pronounced. And when you lose a childcare provider in a rural area, it may be the only childcare provider available in that community. So it's certainly more of a concern in rural communities, but it can happen in metropolitan areas as well, or in pockets of metropolitan areas.
Now, another thing that we're probably going to hear throughout this conversation is high quality childcare. Can you describe it, exactly what that is?
Sure. Basically in a nutshell, it means, number one, to Barbie's points, that you have people who know how to work with young children, how to work with them, how to stimulate their learning. You have environments that are appropriate to young children, the indoor and outdoor environments. You have a curriculum that really develops the whole child, not just their what we consider academic learning, right? ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, but the whole child, their social emotional learning also. I know it sounds like a fuzzy term, but actually social emotional skills, the ability to pay attention, the ability to get along well with others and communicate, etc. These are actually the skills that are just as crucial to a child being successful in school or to a person being successful in the workplace. And a quality environment builds all of those skills in a child. So that's basically it.
All right. So, I think part of this is, the workforce shortage. Barbie, can you tell us about wages for childcare workers, benefits, and did we lose workers because providers closed, or are they fleeing for better pay in another industry?
Well, I think it's about tenfold of that. So notoriously, childcare providers or childcare workers have not been paid well. And again, it goes back to labor being a really big chunk of a provider's revenue. So, and the lack of benefits, because benefits are expensive, healthcare, paying for holidays, and whatever that might look like. And I think it also reflects on the type of childcare provider that you work for. Maybe a larger corporation might have better benefits than, let's just say, a small mom and pop, and what they're able to provide for their staff. So during the pandemic, we were open for the most part. There were childcare centers that decided that they were going to close for maybe a month or 2 or 3, whatever that may look like for them and for the families that they were serving. But for the most part, our childcare centers were open. However, when COVID started hitting classrooms, that's when I think there was a fear. There was, maybe the classroom had to shut down. So then you had to quarantine for 10 days or whatever that may look like. And then you come back to work and then it happens again. So that's an unstable work environment. And for somebody that's making, $12, $13, $14 an hour, they depend on their paycheck and they're living paycheck to paycheck. So having that unstable work and that not knowing what to expect, I think really made some people take a look at other options. I know there are reports that in 2020, Amazon in Arizona hired over 30,000 people. And when we're competing with companies that are paying $17, $18, $19 an hour to start, and maybe they're paying also your tuition to go to college. I know Starbucks is doing that. I know Walmart is doing that. Target is doing that. That's competition. That's big competition that we have to go up against for our industry to do this really important work. And so parents can go to work and improve our economy. So being a childcare worker is hard. It is complex. We're building brains. We want to create vibrant workforce, or a vibrant workforce for our center-based providers and home providers and where families are choosing to put their children. But pay has long been the problem in our industry, and to stop that revolving door at the back of the building and retain these people, we have to do better as an industry. We have to pay people better. We have to give them benefits and what is important for their families, for them to be able to pay their bills and to thrive as well.
Yeah, we just got a a message from somebody that said that they've lost a lot of their employees to, the call centers and so forth. So
Exactly. I think, having, when you're making on the lower end of the spectrum of the pay scale, having a stable work environment, knowing that you can get up in the morning and go to work and your job is going to be there, and not have that, scary part of maybe I'm going to have to close a classroom, or, the tough thing too is without having staff, you're often working more than your 8-hour shift. Maybe you're working 10 hours, maybe you're working 11 hours, day after day after day. And I don't know if any of you have ever had the wonderful opportunity to go into a toddler classroom or a 2-year-old classroom. It's tough work. It is exhausting work, but it is rewarding and fun work as well. But we've seen our workforce decline and leave, and we need to create a pipeline for these people to come back, for people to want to get in this industry and stay and do this great work.
Mhm. And that brings me to a point that Liz made the other day, that these workers are often viewed as babysitters, but they're really educators. Liz, can you expand on that?
Sure. So Gary, when childcare was created, it was created in the Second World War because a lot of women had to go back to work, because the men were all fighting the war, and they needed their children to be safe, to be cared for while they had to work. So pretty much then they were babysitters. But we know a lot more about how the human brain develops now. We know that when a child is born, the brain is the only organ that is not fully developed, and 90% of its growth actually happens between birth and 5 years old. So if you think about it, building a foundation, these brain connections, the brain growth that happens because a child is interacting with their environment and with the people around them. So if they have really high quality, nurturing, enriching experiences in that birth to 5 space, that brain is going to develop in positive ways that really promote learning. If a child does not have a good quality interactions when they're young, if they don't have, people talking, singing, playing, the opportunity to interact with other children, learning experiences, etc., then those brain connections aren't happening. And what you start to see are gaps in learning that are happening as early as 9 to 18 months. You're starting to see those gaps in language, etc. And those gaps only get wider as children get older and then they enter school. So I think one of the examples we give is that these gaps can start to appear as early as 9 and 18 months. By the time a child is 3 or 4 years old, their language abilities, their general knowledge, etc., are actually really good predictors of their 3rd grade reading comprehension. And we all know that that's a good predictor of graduating from high school and kind of going on. So this is something that builds, and we can either build it in a positive way that gets us the outcomes that we want, or we're going to be closing gaps pretty much throughout the rest of the system.
Should we, I don't know, I guess, raise the status of these workers and have college degrees for early childhood, or are there already degrees for early childhood?
Yes, there are already degrees. There's obviously a child development associate degree. There's bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, etc. So it's not that. It's actually being able to keep people who know how to work with young children in the field. And to Barbie's point, when you've historically paid these wonderful early educators pay people to collect garbage or to groom your dog, it's not something that actually encourages someone to keep their skill set with the youngest children that need their help the most. So we need to value the early childhood profession as a profession. We need to value the early childhood workforce as educational professionals. And we need to work together to design a system that encourages people to go into early education, supports them like the professionals that they are, and gets us the outcomes for our children that we all want.
And I think you also mentioned the idea of an apprenticeship program or something like that.
Yeah, Barbie knows a little bit more about that, but states are trying all sorts of different approaches to try to encourage individuals to go into early childhood and to support them in doing that. First things first, it self-funds scholarships for individuals who want to achieve a child development associate, in some areas bachelor's degrees. But the big challenge that we have is also keeping them in the profession, so we don't have that revolving door. And in order to do that, they need to be, they need to be compensated as professionals, and we need to find a way that does that, that benefits more providers than the current system is doing.
All right, I'd like to go back to Barbie for just a second, for all the way back to question number one. We got a comment here, somebody, and I didn't want to let this one slip by. When you say family, friends, and neighbors, do you mean licensed in-home care, unlicensed care, or both?
Family, friend, and neighbor is usually referred to as unlicensed care.
Mhm.
In our state, you can care for up to 4 children that are not of yours for pay. If you hit that 5 number, then you do need to be licensed. Now, we know that there are unregulated people taking, just taking care of as many people as they can. We don't encourage that. But family, friend, and neighbor, that piece, they're usually, and you know what, they might be the aunt, the uncle, the grandmother, the family friend that, is now wants to be is going to be a nanny, and they're usually taking care of maybe just a couple of children. So we're really talking about unlicensed care, and that's one of the reasons why these caregivers are not trackable. With a licensed in-home provider, those are trackable. And we can know how many they're licensed for, and they have right, they're regulated by the Department of Health Services and have twice a year visits. Then there are also DES certified homes as well. They might not be licensed, but they do have a certification through the Department of Economic Security to receive child care assistance for low-income families as well.
Okay.
I hope that helps.
So what are the consequences for families when, a childcare provider shuts down? I mean, can you take us through a scenario, or, provide us with an anecdote that you know about?
Well, I think it's a disruption to the whole system, because it doesn't just disrupt the family. It disrupts the family, it disrupts their jobs. Let's say both mom and dad are working, and we've got 2 children, right? So now most of the time, what's going to happen, mom is going to have to stay home until they find a different childcare provider. That's what, I'm just being typical of what this happens. We know that women have left the workforce in droves during the pandemic. And then that employer now, mom's employer, are they going to be flexible with her to be able to work from home? Can she work from home with 2 children? All of those things. And then we've got the issue of the childcare provider, whether it's a classroom or it's an entire childcare, that community is now impacted. If there were 50 families that were going there, they're all going through the same thing, and now we've got multiple employers that are suffering from the fact that now my employees can't come to work because they don't have stable childcare. I think one of the things that we talked about a lot during the pandemic was opens and closures, and First Things First has they run our Quality First program, and so they were able to keep a really good pulse on their Quality First providers, if they were open or closed. From a licensing standpoint, it was basically if a provider reported that they were closed. But so then when we started opening back up, we started looking at the numbers again, like 2,400 licensed providers. Well, are they open? Yeah, well, they're mostly open. But what does that open really mean? Because we have classrooms now, because we don't have enough staff that Maybe those classrooms are not open. Maybe I used to have three-year-old classrooms and now I have one 3-year-old classroom. We're serving less kids because we have less staff. So then we have a slot problem. And that's a problem that we have to address. Not necessarily the number of providers that are out there, but it's the space and the slots that are available.
And we have one person in the audience, I think, who kind of echoed what you just said. And just want to read what they said, if I can pull it up here. It's not working for me here.
I think Angela can probably also speak
Yeah.
from the business, standpoint too, of what childcare means to the economy and to business providers, and how important a stable, the continuity of care it is for families, and how important a part of the economy it is. It's part of our infrastructure.
Yeah, and I was going to ask Angela, first of all, can you just tell us about Intel's footprint on the Valley? We all know that they're a big employer, but how many employees, work sites, and the economic impact of the company on Arizona. And then tell us about your childcare tuition program for employees.
Well, first, thank you so much for having me this morning. I'm happy to represent Intel. Our footprint in the Valley is very significant. We're a great American story. We've been here for over 40 years. Right now, we have approximately 12,000 employees, and we're looking to grow that. So you may have heard the announcement about a $20 billion investment in the state of Arizona, where we will add an additional 3,000 employees. So that'll bring us to about 15,000 employees in the state. Our economic impact right now is just over $8.5 billion. So with an annual economic impact that's significant, and that's going to continue to grow with the addition of the new employees. Childcare is tremendously important to Intel and to our entire workforce. We have partnered with several leading early childhood education providers that offer employees tuition discount upon enrollment for full or part-time care. Additionally, we partner with near-site childcare centers that can offer our employees priority enrollment, backup care. It does allow us to decrease the amount of time off employees need to take when their typical childcare is not an option for them. So backup care has been very, very popular with a lot of our employees. And Intel employees, they've negotiated a 15% tuition discount from the general community rate, 0 registration fees. So there are a number of things that they have done to help our workforce and to try to solidify the child care benefits for employees. The one thing that's really important about Intel is they believe that supporting the whole family allows for more equity in general across the workforce, because caregiving responsibilities tend to be shared more equally at home. But we're also finding, and I think Barbie made this point, that more females are leaving the workforce because of child care issues. Well, at Intel, we have significant goals around bringing more females into the workplace and significant goals around women in technical positions. So if we are addressing the child care needs, we believe that we will provide that equity in our workforce and allow more females to enter the workforce, which helps us reach our goals.
Okay. How many employees take advantage of it? Do you know? And what kind of feedback have you gotten about it?
Yeah, we've had tremendous feedback. We have thousands of employees that have taken advantage of the child care benefit, where it's now or in the past. It has been tremendously popular because it's very, very flexible in terms of the number of offerings that we provide. We're offering not just child care discounts, but flex time, job sharing, new parent programs, modified work schedules, which really allows parents just a number of options in response to their child care needs. We have bonding leave, which has also been very, very popular with our employees. And when an employee returns back into the workplace after their bonding leave, they can actually work part-time for full-time salary. So Intel's been very, very good to their employees. It's a great culture and a great place to work when it comes to childcare and allowing the family to address this issue as a whole.
Barbie, do you know of any other programs like this, with other large employers or even small employers?
Many years ago, I worked with La Petite, and we worked with a lot of larger employers that did have corporate discounts. American Express, I think, was one. I'm sure that there are others out there as well too that are trying to be creative and help their families as much as they are. And like Angela said, that's it. All of the things that Intel is offering their families is fabulous, but it also kind of makes me sad at the same time that we have to do that. We should be able to, as parents, to go find affordable childcare and not have to count on our employer to negotiate discounts and all of those things, because childcare is so expensive. So those are the things that, and I'm so happy that Intel does that. But at the same time, it's like I want to live in a world where we can make these decisions and not have to worry about the financial impact on our families. And we should be able to put our children in safe, loving, nurturing environments and not have it hit our pocketbook and be such a big impact and put a dent in it as much as it does.
I'll give these companies a little plug. Somebody, one of our audience members said PetSmart, USAA, Banner Health, they all have
right.
employee-sponsored childcare.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Like Bright Horizons is in a lot of those that you just mentioned too. The corporations come in, and I mean, Bright Horizons specializes in corporate care like that. And so there's a definite niche out there. But there are large corporations. I know Coca-Cola, and I think Pepsi does too, gives their, and I'm sure most large corporations have some, agreements with larger corporations to give discounts to families. So.
And Angela, you said it's a 15% discount?
That's correct. And remember, there's a significant return on investment for the employer. I mean, these employees come back, they're stable, they're much more productive. So there's certainly an economic benefit to the employer as well. By taking care of the employee, they ultimately take care of the business and take care of the customer.
Yep. That whole family approach is really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if our technical help can get the slide back up. I'm just going to ask you, Barbie, if you can comment on the second graph on the slide, which shows 28% of parents surveyed with children under 18 say the cost of childcare is preventing them from going back to school or work or school. So, we're going to learn a little bit here pretty soon about the cost, and, keep in mind the 15% discount, and it's still a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, it doesn't look like the slide's going to go up, but that's basically what it said. 28% of the people surveyed think that the cost is preventing them from going back from working or going back to school.
Yeah. I that's, again, that we all know that childcare tuition is expensive. So the first graph here, limited availability of childcare is preventing me from going back to school. This is by race and ethnicity. And we know that Black, Brown, and Indigenous families have the toughest time within, choosing childcare, being able to afford it. And also when it comes to the work environment as well. So that's clearly shown on these graphs here. And we want to be able to have people to, if they need childcare, to be able to go back to school. And we did pass a bill this year that allows that for specific education degrees. Nursing and education is one of those. So people can, if they qualify for childcare, can get childcare assistance, and then they can go to school full time with waiving that work requirement, which is really important for families to be able to do that as well. So we just hope that good things keep coming from the federal government. We definitely need to work on our state investments in childcare and continue to do that hard work for all of the families in Arizona.
Okay, you can go ahead and take down that slide now. And, some of the numbers, I mean, they're all right around 8,000, 9,000, for a toddler, 11,000 for an infant. And, tuition at ASU is $11,000 a year. why does it cost so much to, for childcare? What drives the cost up?
Labor.
Mhm.
Your labor is your biggest expense from a childcare, standpoint, and what your overhead costs are. Let's say if you're in a, in a strip mall setting, sometimes you have really high overhead fees, CAM fees, all of that. But your labor is your biggest expense. So, and unfortunately, that gets passed on to families. And we know that high quality care costs a lot of money. And so that's one of the reasons that we hope with the Build Back Better plan that this will, the reimbursement rates will be sufficient to reimburse providers for the cost of quality and not just the price of childcare, which there's a lot of moving parts into the reimbursement rates, but right now we use what's called a market rate survey, and that's based on the price of care. It's really not the cost of quality. So.
Okay. And we got a comment here from somebody that says, we need to remember that quality childcare does cost
Yep.
money, and quality care and education will ultimately lead to productive and contributing members of society.
Mhm.
So-
I think the point that someone just made in the chat is also really important. And I was going to make, because Barbie and I have talked about how little the childcare workforce is paid. And then we say that labor is the highest cost. Well, that is because, again, we're dealing with young children. Okay, these are not, second graders. These are not eighth graders. These are young children. And when you talk about infants and you talk about providing quality interactions, giving the children the attention and the care that they need, you can't have 20 infants in one classroom with one teacher. Your ratio should be like 1-3, 1-4, to be able to give each child the attention that they need. So you talk about hiring a staff member and all the costs associated with that staff member, and you're talking about being able to serve 4 children. That is development. That's appropriate to that child. That is making sure that child is not being warehoused. That child is being nurtured and their brain is developing. So this is also why the costs are higher, is because we can't have 25 children in one classroom with one adult. Well, that's probably not a good idea in kindergarten and first grade either, but especially when you're dealing with children at the most crucial time of their development, you can't have them all, scrunched into a room. It really takes a caregiver who has the time to give each child the attention that they need and deserve.
What about insurance? I mean, is it more expensive than your average business? You're around children. Are the premiums higher because of that?
There's a lot of things that feed into the increased costs. For example, you have to keep the environment, very, very clean. There are a lot of health and safety standards that, childcare providers need to comply with. You have your ratios. You have the fact that infants, toddlers, and preschoolers can be very hard on learning materials and toys, and those have to be constantly, replaced. You have food costs, you have supply costs, and what we know is that those skyrocketed during the pandemic. So you're talking about a business that is operating on a razor-thin margin to begin with. Then the pandemic hits, and nationwide, I think the analysis said that operating costs went up 47%. In Arizona, in center-based care, they went 85%. And for family-based care, like the certified family providers that Barbie was talking about, they went up 75%. And this is because you need more health and safety, you need more supplies, your staffing costs are going up. And so they're trying to do this at a time when they're actually being able to serve about half the number of children that they had pre-pandemic. It's just like it was the perfect storm.
How much have we received in pandemic relief dollars? Have they helped, and when's it going to run out? And where does it go? How is it being used?
Sure. So Arizona received a grand total of about $1.2 billion in federal child care relief. I know that sounds really big when you use a word like billion. So initially in the summer of 2020, a lot of it was used to support child care providers in staying open and in providing child care to the families of essential workers. That was the majority of the first relief plan called the CARES Act went for that. Later on in the end of 2020, it was used to support 3-month mini grants to providers to encourage providers to open and stay open, because we had a second wave in late 2020. And that did. A lot of providers, about 1,900 providers, did take advantage of those grants. And then in this past summer of 2021, the remaining portion of those funds and a little bit of some additional federal help really went to try to help providers address their workforce shortages. And a lot of providers use those to pay basically bonuses and staff retention efforts, as well as to try to recruit new staff. So that was the first wave. And then the huge bulk, about $1 billion, came later in 2021 and is being implemented now across a variety of strategies, like 20 different strategies. One of them, a big one, was to increase reimbursement rates, which, you asked, Gary, why so many providers went out of business. And that's because they, if they were caring for children under state subsidies, then they were being paid significantly less than what it was costing them to actually provide care. So reimbursement rates were increased, including slightly bigger increases for those serving infants and toddlers, as well as children in the care of the child welfare system. And then, of course, bumps for providers providing quality care. With those increases, we are getting better, but we're still at a fraction of what the true cost of care is. So other measures to enhance, to bring back some of the preschool services that were lost when Arizona lost its federal preschool development grant. Other measures, the bulk of the funds had to, under federal law, be used to provide monthly grants to providers. And these are actually helping the providers stay open as they're still struggling with the workforce issues. They're still struggling with being able to open classrooms. These grants are what are helping so many providers actually be able to stay open. To your point, Gary, the majority of that ends in 2024. So if we have been able to improve the system, I mean, I do have to, give a lot of credit to the Department of Economic Security in working with the provider community and the advocacy community to say what needs to be improved, what can we start to make some headway in, and that's good progress. But unless we see some additional investment, once we get to 2024, those improvements might go away.
Okay. Give us a real brief history on, state matching funds, because from what I understand, we used to provide, about 85 million a year before the Great Recession. So what happened?
Sure. So prior to the Great Recession, the State General Fund was into childcare subsidies for about $85 million. And then the Great Recession hit. The state found itself with a $1 billion shortfall. And part of the way that was addressed was to significantly reduce the state general fund portion for childcare subsidies. And then in fiscal year 2012 to eliminate it. About 7 million has since been restored of that 85 million in general fund revenues. But right now in terms of state general fund, there's about $7 million going into childcare subsidies.
Representative Sierra, tell us a little bit about your experience at the legislature trying to pass childcare legislation, and the mindsets of Democrats versus Republicans in when that legislation comes before them. You actually got your bill out of the House, from what I understand, and how'd you manage that?
Well, Gary, thank you for that question. First, I'll just say it was a lot of legislative kung fu that we had to do. And it was people like Barbie and Liz, and a coalition of early childhood education providers and experts that were part of this coalition that we built that pretty much willed the bill past the finish line. Now, we got it over to the Senate, and at that point, it sort of stalled, but we were given the we learned that it was going to be in the budget. Well, politically speaking, this went really badly, and I think there's been many stories of where the budget went in the final days of last session, where we had things like early childhood education, we had various infrastructure investments going on, But the Republican majority had to placate a handful of radical right-wing folks which wanted to fund things that ultimately got stripped out by the Supreme Court. That was the price of their vote. And that was quite literally a quote that said, this is the price of our vote. So they stripped out all those things. However, thank goodness for Representative Joanne Osborne. She took that nearly that $1.2 billion. She worked a lot with that $1.2 billion that the federal government had given us through the various recovery acts. And with that, put a good amount of money into these systems, including 41 million that is going to go for our high quality pre-K programs, whether it's at a district school, whether it's at a charter school or a private provider. Those are the ones that are going to be able to make sure that our 3- and 4-year-olds get that quality instruction that's going to make just worlds of difference. And, you know, and also in this whole Republican versus Democrat, I mean, we really had to work the heck out of that bill. So if you're one of those folks that watches the legislature on camera, and God bless you if you do, because that's just I can't imagine that if that or Judge Judy. But if you're watching that, you probably saw me just running around the floor with a little green piece of paper, trying to whip the votes for that. And one of the telling things that happened was there was more than one Republican member that would say, well, can we do a target or a trial program with this? And it's like, the trials have been around since the 60s, the 70s. The Perry preschool study is now looking at the children of their original cohort and showing how the children of Perry's preschool participants are excelling in high school and in college. So the data is there. And even when I showed them the data, irrefutable, showing them in multiple studies, you still saw a lot of no votes on House Bill 2015, which is the bill that we ran to restore the funding. So I think that there is just a disconnect in what the investment is. And I think, Gary, we're going to talk about Build Back Better here in just a minute. And I'm looking forward to talking a little bit about that when we get to that point. Okay, great. So,
Liz, we've got it pending in the Senate, Build Back Better. Do the people in your field see that as a beacon of hope? And can you tell us what it provides in childcare?
Yeah, I think that anyone that understands how young children learn and also the status of our current system certainly sees this plan as a beacon of hope. Yes. It is a $400 billion plan, an investment in both childcare and preschool. It would provide for families earning up to 250% of their state median income with free or reduced cost childcare. So obviously for the families earning the least, free, up to 250% of the state median income to pay no more than 7% of their income for childcare. We talk a lot about the cost of childcare and it being right around the cost of state tuition at a state university. But a lot of times people lose the context of that. So the state median income is right around $70,000 for families with children. And that seems really, $70,000 doesn't seem that bad, except that it's the median income. And only about 6 counties in Arizona actually have median incomes that come close to that, 60,000 or above. You have to remember that in some counties, the median income is $41,000 a year. So you have families that are actually paying more for their childcare than they're paying for rent. That's untenable for most families. They just cannot do it. So to have this plan that really looks to make a multi-year commitment in ensuring that more families have access to reliable, safe, quality childcare, and that more children have access to early learning, including more 3- and 4-year-olds have access to preschool. Of course, this is a huge investment, and it's not just a huge investment in terms of dollars. It's a huge investment in terms of building an infrastructure that is going to be critical for economic development in this state as we come out of the pandemic. And it's a huge investment in an infrastructure that's going to ensure that our children are ready when they enter kindergarten and don't require, a bunch of remediation or grade retention, et cetera. It is just an amazing investment that could have huge returns for Arizona later on.
Gary, if I could,
Yeah, go
really
ahead.
quickly, we are on the verge of a golden age for young American children if we can get this thing passed. The Center for American Progress just did a state-by-state study on what that's going to mean in terms of families being able to access. Currently in Arizona, about 11% of families qualify for subsidies. With the Build Back Better program, more than 94% of families are going to be eligible for some sort of subsidy at varying levels. That's going to put our current, we're almost at about 18,000 families or children in these programs. It's going to go to nearly 250,000 children that can participate in this. This is a game changer for an entire generation of children. Just think about 20 years from now, that investment that we're making into these kids is going to be one of the best things that we can do as an American society. It's passed the House, it's at the Senate. And right now, I think the one senator that's sort of holding it up is Senator Joe Manchin out of West Virginia. West Virginia stands to increase from about 5,000 kids in their quality programs to 60,000. So if we can get this thing passed, this is going to be one of the most monumental pieces. And for all the people who work in that space, this is one of the biggest pieces of legislation in American history. And to have childcare and early childhood education as the cornerstone of it, just imagine all the decades we've had just trying to get people on board for nickels and dimes. And now we're on the verge of this fantastic era for our children. And let's hope we can get that passed.
Thank you, Representative Sierra. A couple of, we just ran a column in our in the Capital Times where a couple of folks in the childcare industry, advocacy industry, said that the states are going to have to opt in to receive a 95% match, and they're concerned about that. So will legislation have to be passed here in Arizona to opt in? And if so, Representative Sierra, what's the temperature for that at the legislature?
We got House Bill 2015 over the line in the House, and we would have had support in the Senate. It can be done. And people like Barbie and Liz and the coalition we built with all of those people, I would never bet against those folks. I'm just the fortunate person in the legislature that got to run that bill. They are a force of nature in early childhood education. I have no doubt that they have the passion, the wherewithal to get this over the line. One of the things that happened, Gary, is we lost our funding because a couple of years ago, there was a grant program that the federal government had provided. Well, when they sort of redid it, it became a grant competition, and the feds, we scored very highly, but the feds at the end of the day said, well, Arizona, you're not investing any of your own money. You have no skin in this game. Why should we invest in you if you're not going to be willing to invest yourself? And I think that's a story that we can tell at the legislature. And I think, in fact, I am absolutely confident with folks like Barbie, Liz, and all of these organizations that stepped up to help pass House Bill 2015. We will get this across the line. We will get that extra funding that we need to ensure that we can do this.
We just got a comment to say thank you to the forces of nature. So we just got time for one more question. I'm going to take it from the audience. What can individual viewers do to help improve the childcare situation and make people aware? Whoever wants to take that, or we can go around the horn.
I think that really it's to convey to their policymakers that this issue matters to them. Childcare early learning is really not an issue that comes up a lot in election cycles. It's not an issue that a lot of people are talking to their elected leaders about, and yet it's an issue that affects so much. It affects our jobs, it affects the education of our children, etc. So even making policymakers aware that this issue matters to them, and that they would like something to be done about it. And I would just like to just say one thing about Build Back Better. A lot of times when we look at legislation, Representative Sierra will tell you, any policymaker of any party will tell you, that one of the biggest things that comes into play is the price tag. What is this going to cost us in funds to do? And I think one of the things that folks can help to convey to policymakers is, what's it costing us now? I mean, the U.S. Chamber Foundation just put out a report that says that Arizona loses $348 million a year in lost tax revenue because of instability in childcare. 3 out of 4 parents are, missing work because of unstable childcare. 1 in 16 quit their job voluntarily because of unstable childcare. So we're losing big. It's costing us big bucks already in terms of lost revenue, paying more for remediation when children enter school not prepared. Businesses are paying $1.4 billion a year in recruiting and retraining and that constant churn because people are leaving jobs because they don't have childcare. It is costing us so much more than it would cost us to support a system that stabilizes this, that puts children in quality environments where they're being nurtured so that they can be good students when they enter our K-12 system, and families that have stable employment and are wonderful workers and are paying taxes and are contributing to the economy. And so I think that the big thing is to have people from all walks, whether your business, convey what it means to you, a parent, an educator, talk to your policymakers about why this matters to you, because sometimes I think it's like that lost issue. Like they like a lot of policymakers may see that early learning is only something that the early educators, care about. And it really is not. It literally impacts so many facets of life in Arizona, and just could be just something that just makes us that, economic and educational powerhouse that we want to be.
All right. Well, we're going to have to end it on that note, where we've gone up to an hour. And I'd like to thank once again our sponsor, the Center for the Future of Arizona, and thank our panelists who did this because they want to get the word out about childcare and early education in Arizona. I also want everyone to know that we've got morning scoops planned for January, so keep an eye on your inbox. I'm Gary Grotto with the Arizona Capital Times. Have a wonderful day.
Bye.